Leanne, Naidoo, welcome to the Waypoint Connect studio. It's so great that you're joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So the idea with these conversations is that we talk to real people like yourself. That's what I always love about you, the fact that you're real. And what we see is what we get, which is a good thing in your case. So thanks a lot for joining us. But apart from connecting with real people, we talk about real life topics, real life challenges that people might face, but real stories, things that we face every day. And with the scope of COVID, what everybody's going through at the moment, a hot topic that's coming up is mental health, something that we don't often talk about. As I mentioned in our conversation just now, for me, definitely, it's not a topic that my parents discussed with me. We had a lot of conversations about a lot of things, but mental health wasn't one of them. And I think back to my school years, just a funny meme last night. I saw this picture of a grasshopper with a thorax and the biological names for the parts of the grasshopper, and it said, "This is why you're not good at Excel, because this is what you studied at school." So I think there's a direct correlation between what we study at school and what we prepared for in life. And I know one of the topics we never discussed was mental health in school. And then we expect people to face the challenges of life, face it head on, and be okay. So I thought today we just talk about mental health.
Very, very excited about this topic, Dirk. I think it's such an important topic. I'm very passionate about the topic, and I agree with you. I think that it's sad that we aren't having more conversations about mental health, because if we were, it would be providing people with more opportunity to come forward and just own what's happening in their internal world. And I think a lot of people are feeling very isolated because they're so fearful, and there's such a shame around mental health issues, sadly. Although I must say, I think we've come a long way talking about the stigma around mental health. I believe we've come away. I think it's not as bad as it was in previous years. I'm very happy to tell you that I'm seeing people pop into the practice for what we call mental health checkups.
Yep.
Like you would go to the doctor to check out your general health.
Yeah.
You pop into the psychologist to check out your mental health, just to see how you're doing. And I'm loving that. So whilst there is a reduction in the stigma, I think there's still a lot of people who feel very ashamed because people aren't speaking about it, because, as you rightly say, parents are fearful of addressing it. Teachers maybe, or in the school context as well, there isn't enough. Although life orientation, I think, goes a long way in trying to address it. I think there still isn't that much opportunity to really have the types of conversations about mental health that we need to have. And when you look at the stats, it's actually a very big issue. They say in South Africa that 1 in 6 individuals have got either depression, anxiety, or some other problem related to substance use. 1 in 6. That's quite a high.
That's high. And to be honest, I was taken aback by your 1 in 6. But then as we're talking and I'm thinking about it, if we think of the factors that cause or lead to these mental challenges that we face, the pressure that we're under that leads to these challenges, and we think of the South African society and the challenge that people face there, they're saying we're preparing for 7 million people to be unemployed this year.
Yeah.
If you're constantly living in the space of not having an income, and I'm supposed to provide for the family, I think that 1 in 6 actually is a much higher number.
Possibly, because of course people are sometimes dishonest when asked questions about their mental health, and not everyone's stepping up to be counted in the stats, so it probably is far worse. But just on an interesting note, you might be interested to hear one of the biggest hindrances to sound mental health. Do you know what it is?
No.
You should, because you've got them. Teenagers. I can personally testify to the fact that is the biggest stumbling block in my own mental health. No, but jokes aside, I think you're absolutely right. I think in this climate of a worldwide pandemic, people losing jobs, all sorts of financial uncertainties, school arrangements constantly changing. I mean, one day there's sport, one day there isn't. Now we're platooning, and all these, we've got to have the PPE, all of these things, uncertainties tend to generate anxiety. And of course,
talking about school, for instance, I'm just having a conversation with somebody the other day, and what we said was, for a lot of kids, what they're looking forward to at school is what happens outside of school. School is what they need to do, but what gets them excited is the stuff that happens outside of school. And now with COVID, all they have is school. All the other things have fallen to the wayside. There isn't sport, there isn't that social and cultural program that's running. So I think while we're having this conversation, the people we need to include in this is our children and the kids that are in school. And that's why I'm thinking, especially where we are now, that 1 in 6 figure, it's actually a lot higher.
Yeah.
So before we jump into the stigma surrounding it, maybe you just want to share a bit about why I asked you to come and talk about this topic, because you're a registered counseling psychologist. So just as you shared with me, just clarify for us the differences in terms of psychologists that one finds.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, Dirk. So the reality is that in South Africa, psychologists in private practice, whether clinical or counseling, mostly do pretty much the same work, because most of what we see is people battling with depression and people battling with anxiety. And then on the assessment side, that's another story which I won't go to today. So a lot of commonalities in terms of the work of the clinical and the counseling. But if you want to go to the Health Professions Council definition of a counseling psychologist, what they say is that your counseling psychologist deals with the normal scope of problems, which is already like halfway there in destigmatizing, because it's acknowledging the fact that to have difficulties and to have challenges, it's part of life. It's normal. It's going to happen. So things like relationship challenges, or feeling demotivated, or feeling very stressed about your work, or marital issues, all of that falls very comfortably within the scope. And then, of course, dealing with depression and anxiety falls within the scope of a counseling psychologist. So your clinical can also then work with some of the more severe psychopathology. But I find what also happens is you develop a particular interest. So whichever you are, clinical or counseling, you'll find, for example, if you see a lot of eating disorders, it becomes your thing. You aren't allowed to advertise that. So it's a bit of word of mouth to find out what a person's thing is. But yeah, so some people do actually have a little niche that they really particularly enjoy working with.
Which would make sense. So I'm really glad that you guys are joining us in on this conversation. So Silke, thank you for giving us a shout out. Always great to hear from you. Benny, fantastic. And I just want to say, Benny, congratulations on your birthday. Have a fantastic day, and may there be many more years for you. Deerwald, always great that you are with us. I love your comments and your questions. And if you feel that we're hitting the spot there and you would like more information about this, feel free in that comment section to just leave us a note there, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about that. So we've talked about creating that niche, and we were saying it's normal. So we're destigmatizing this whole thing. So let's backtrack for a second. What we started off with is it's okay not to be okay. So the first thing we want to address is the fact that you're not abnormal. When you reach out and you say, I need help, it's okay to say, I need help. It's not that there's something wrong with you. I'm abnormal and now everybody's looking weirdly at me. And from what we've said is there are a lot more people that experience these things, these emotions, and they don't understand it's actually impacting their normal function within their relationships and within life. So would you want to highlight some of the things that are like indicators for us that we're under pressure, that we're under strain, and that we might need to reach out to somebody to help us deal with this?
Absolutely. So there are many, many different signs and symptoms or signals that the pressure's too much, or that the anxiety is too high, or that one's dipped into a little bit of a depression. So I'll just touch on a couple, Dirk, but what I would encourage before I even go to a short list is that just pay attention. It's important to be mindful of what's happening in your own internal world. I think what happens with many people, life becomes so busy, and you're so busy rushing from pillar to post, you're so busy trying to fill your program, it becomes a bit of an avoidance strategy. You don't stop to think and feel and be mindful of your thought life and your emotional life, and those two aspects are...
What you're saying, it's not good for me to forget about the problem, sit in front of the Xbox and pretend that it's not there. That's not a good strategy.
No.
Okay.
No. You need to limit that time with the Xbox, Dirk. Please.
Okay.
Set an example to my teens, for heaven's sake. Okay? No, look, there's a time to switch off. Don't get me wrong. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when you find yourself, and I see this with my clients who are super busy, it becomes not just a full program, but it becomes a convenient way to avoid other issues, if you know what I mean. So there's a problem at home.
It gives you a reason to avoid.
Exactly.
Because work is a good reason to avoid. Xbox might not be a good reason to avoid, but
work.
Just, I got this meeting. I need to see this person. I need to get that done, and I'm never dealing with the issue.
That's right. Okay. And even more so, sometimes people in ministry, because it seems like such a godly thing. You know, I'm busy with ministry. I'm reaching out. I'm serving people. What about your family? What about your wife? You know, that's also a very, very important priority, obviously. So to make that time, if it's a weekend away or even just an afternoon of chilling, to actually reflect on how one's doing, I think that's so important. And to be mindful of your own personal signs and symptoms. So if I can use myself as an example, when I'm overworked and there's too much stressful stuff in my work life, I tend to get terrible muscular tension in my shoulders. That's a sign. Then I know, okay, something needs to give, I need to get some stuff off the to-do list because it's just getting too much. Other people, again, will experience things like poor concentration. They're really battling to stay focused on their work. They find themselves being forgetful, maybe. They find themselves being indecisive. A small decision becomes I'm sort of frozen. I don't know where to go with this. Lack of sleep, poor sleep, nightmares, waking up early, not being able to fall asleep again. Sleeping too much can also be a sign. Appetite changes, of course, then things like libido changes, and some people will testify to having a sense of they just want to run away. They just want to get away from it all. And then, of course, a very serious symptom that one needs to pay attention to is suicidal thoughts. Okay. Yeah, and the list goes on, but like I say, I think the most important thing is to be mindful of how you're feeling and what you're thinking and doing. And if you're not noticing it, ask your family, because they'll definitely be able to tell you, or ask your colleagues. They'll definitely be able to point out, when you're stressed, you withdraw, or when you're stressed, you tend to, your focus, your concentration in conversation is a little bit lacking. You can get that feedback if you really, really are not aware of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that it's not just watching out for the indicators in your own life, but also for the people around you, the people you're responsible for. Devot commented about leaders leading in uncertain times, because uncertainty leads to anxiety. Like Benny said, if that anxiety is constant and it stays with you, it presents itself as depression.
Yeah.
And that's a very negative cycle to be in, and very difficult to get out by yourself.
It is.
And for us as we steward, because God has called us to steward relationships, we're responsible for the people around us. We need to be mindful to see how this is not normal for this person. Like you said, they're either sleeping too much or too little, but there's a challenge. Let's take a break from this busyness. Let's have a coffee, have a conversation around how are you doing really? Where is this coming from? And I think that's part of what drives this problem for us, is the fact that culture and society have changed. We don't have those meaningful relationships. We're very isolated. We don't reach out, which makes it difficult to reach out, because we don't have those relationships that we can have enough trust in to be able to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think there are lots of very lonely people in the world, people who, for whatever reason, battle to trust others. So building relationship is very difficult, and so they really try their best to figure it out alone. And it's so sad, because actually it's much easier to figure it out in relationship. It's much easier. In fact, there's something very soothing about when another person understands your emotional world. That's why therapy is that's why it works, because it's comforting to have another person really hear your heart, listen to what's happening in your internal world, and understand and accept you just as you are. There's something very special and very valuable about that. So by just being that listening ear to those around you, if you're picking up, and I think the difficulty is sometimes unpleasant feelings manifest in unpleasant behaviors.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you don't present well when you're battling internally at times, and that actually makes people almost step back or pushes people away, or your behavior can be seen as rejection if you are a withdrawer.
Okay.
And so we actually need to go that extra mile and, show Christ's love even when the person is not that easy to love. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So once again, mindfulness of, we don't know people's stories. We don't know some of the deep, dark things that they've been going through, that they've experienced. It might be terribly personal. There might be a lot of shame involved. So I feel we should always give people the benefit of the doubt and always just have grace for people's behavior, knowing that perhaps they're behaving that way because there's anxiety, because there's depression, because they're processing something deeply traumatic that's happened to them. And right there's an opportunity to show the love of Christ by just even connecting and being a listening ear.
Yeah. I love the fact that you're referring to the love of Christ, and it really comes down to God has called us to live out the love that he has towards people and not simply talk about the love. And I think often as Christians we fail greatly in that. We talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. It's easy to say that we love people, but when it requires me to take time out of my busy schedule to spend time with somebody, am I really willing to do that? And that's where life becomes tough, and why this is something that we as a society need to take seriously and try and break what is currently visible in people's lives.
Yeah.
And from your sharing in terms of those meaningful conversations and listening to people, what I was just challenged on was what you're describing in that conversation. As a father, that's supposed to be the conversations that I need to have with my children. But to what extent are we having those deep, meaningful conversations, or is it just superficial? How was your day? How was school? And what does homework look like? Kind of surface conversations. So I think it places a big responsibility on us as parents to fulfill that role as parents, because we're the first steward of that child's mental health.
100%. So having conversations about anxiety, what it is, what it feels like, how do we behave when we're anxious with our kids is super important. But having said that, I think it's also cool, like whether you're with your running group, whether I'm in my dance class or whatever it is, to also have that freedom to, explore something like anxiety, or if one's experiencing low mood, one's down, to kind of normalize it by raising it in conversation. And definitely with our kids, I think there's a wonderful opportunity to help them to have that self-awareness, to take stock of their own emotional life. So when they're acting out at home, saying, hang on, is there perhaps a little bit of anxiety going on here around back to school? Because as adults, you often know where the anxiety is coming from, and they don't always realize it.
Thank you very much for that. Tanya, thank you for joining us. We started off just prepping testing, and I was commenting on Leanne's lovely hair, and she said she goes to Tanya for her hair. So Tanya, it's great to have you join in on the conversation, and will I just say great job, well done. Leanne, as we're wrapping up, where would somebody go to once they've listened to this? And they've got Benny's notes on what you shared. So if you want to mail this talk through to people, you can just pull Benny's notes from the comments. Thank you, Benny, for sharing that with us. Yeah. But if somebody listened to this and like, I actually need to speak to somebody about it. I thought I was okay, but I'm not. And what would be their next step? Where would they go to?
Well, that's a great question. I think if a person does have medical aid and you really are feeling like you're not yourself, you've crossed the boundary of normal anxiety and sadness into something a bit unfamiliar, it's a good time then to see a professional Yes, it is expensive, but you know what? When you pay for something, you make it work. You make meaning of it. It's. I find that when there's a sacrifice for something, then you take everything you can out of it. I find that sometimes when it's a pro bono, I'm not always certain that people are as committed to doing their part. That's it. Exactly. Having said that, I do fully understand that not everyone has medical aid and not everyone can afford the service. And I'm very pleased to tell you, Dirk, that there are plenty of other options available. So, for example, in Port Elizabeth, there's Revive. They offer free counselling services. They've got an amazing website. You can go onto the Revive website. You can fill out a form. You can email them. You can phone and book an appointment. Fantastic professional service. There's also SADAG, South African Depression and Anxiety Group. They've also got an outstanding website with fantastic resources, everything from post-traumatic stress to ADHD to depression, anxiety, all these things we've been talking about. So that's also a wonderful resource. And then, of course, in the church, you know, there are people that you can reach out to. Most of the churches will have either a pastor or lay people that one can at least have some sort of collegial or friendship conversation with to help process something. And especially if your struggles are of a spiritual nature, that's obviously a fantastic starting point. The life groups are a great place to experience fellowship where you can have these conversations that are, you know, require a little bit more vulnerability. So there are plenty of options. Nobody has to suffer in silence or to suffer alone with mental health issues.
Awesome, Leanne. And I just want to use this opportunity as well to say for us at Waypoint, it's all about connection, relationship. And that's why at Waypoint, it's really about impacting people's lives, not from the perspective of a message that we give, but from the relationships that we have with people, cultivating them, growing them, and strengthening them. And one of the places where those relationships really grow is the life groups that you refer to about. So if you're not in a life group yet, feel free to reach out to me and get connected, because within a life group, that's where we build these relationships that if you need somebody to talk to, that you've got that person that you can trust, that you can have a conversation with and know this is going to stay between the two of us. But also have that person have the vested interest in you, so that when they listen to you and they challenge you in love, because it's for your own best interest. They don't sit with a hidden agenda there. So for us, life groups really is crucial in terms of breaking what we see culturally, people segregating, moving away from other people, but really investing in people's lives and being about the person next to you.
Yeah. 100%. And the other thing on a similar note is the interest groups. I think Waypoint has done a fantastic job in creating interest groups. Our running group is one of my favorite things. I mean, if you want good mental health, join our running group. It's not just about the running, it's about the social too. But having said that, you know, obviously healthy body, healthy mind, you know, the importance of either running or getting some form of exercise is also right up there with other top priorities that we need to look at in our lives.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Leanne. So go to waypoint.org.za, go to the contact us, leave a message there for us if you want to be connected to a group or interest group. Like Leanne said, we've got a group that's focused on running, a group that's focused on walking, and a lot of other groups that are starting around interest. So definitely be part of that. Leanne, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you very much for your time. I know you're really busy, so I really appreciate the time that you set aside for us and to spend it with us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and get input from you. So thank you very much.
It's a huge pleasure, Dirk. Thank you so much for the invitation.
And thank you to you for joining us during your lunch hour.